At this point, we've learned a lot about how to play, how to customize your character further, how we progress, how we get stronger, all that stuff. I'd say we haven't covered necessarily everything in that realm of thought, but I think we're in a good spot to talk about something a little different, a little more abstract. Something that really sets classic WoW apart from retail WoW and other modern MMOs. Today we're going to talk about what you can expect from the leveling experience. There are many things you can do on your journey to level 60. Let's talk about the pros and cons of 4 different categories: grinding, questing, grouping, and dungeons. Grinding is simply killing mobs over and over again. Most of the time you pull one mob at a time due to how deadly pulling multiple mobs can be. AoE spells are usually pretty weak at low levels and only with one person, though I know certain special frost mages will beg to differ. This is usually quite monotonous and boring and repetitive, though it is regarded to be slightly more efficient than any other method of leveling, and it's often one of the best ways to gain reputation and money. Not much more to say here. Questing is the traditional way to go about leveling, just as it is in many MMOs. Go to a town, talk to the people there with gold exclamation marks above their heads, read the quest, do what it says, and don't come back until that question mark is yellow. Oh, and speaking of colors, if you see blue exclamation and question marks, it means that it's a daily or repeatable quest, which usually doesn't give XP. Questing is generally slightly slower than just grinding, but it's definitely less monotonous and much more fun. While some quests feel like chore lists, there's definitely an abundance of epic quest lines out there across all levels. One objective upside to questing is that you'll quite reliably get good gear in comparison to the other methods of leveling. Even when people grind to level, they almost always pick up a quest or two, probably because completing that quest is incidental to grinding in the area. Grouping is without a doubt the safest way to level, safe from pulling lots of mobs or safe from world PvP on PvP servers. Oh yeah, in most zones, players from the opposite faction can attack you, and one of the best ways to prevent dying to other players is to group up with friends. Grouping is oftentimes required for many quests involving elite mobs or certain mob types. I'm looking at you, Murlocs. Don't think for a second I'm not. Also, an awesome benefit to leveling in a group is that you can level a certain specs that would otherwise make solo leveling a pain. Specs like Resto Druid or Resto Shaman, or Prot Warrior or Prot Paladin. The main downside to leveling in a group is that your XP from mob kills gets split up depending on how many people you have in the group, what level they are, and what level the mob is. However, the more people you have in your group, the more XP that mob can yield, which is split among the party. Without doing a bunch of math, here's what this looks like. Keep in mind, you'll also be killing things much faster with a group, so the XP differential mostly weighs out, and it's actually quite beneficial to group up in most scenarios. Grouping up is by no means required in the open world, but in specific instances, it absolutely is. This means dungeons. You need a full 5-man party and some decent coordination because these dungeons are filled to the brim with elite mobs. But as a result, they're easily some of the best places to get gear. And not just from bosses, there are at least a couple quests that you can get from the zone that the dungeon is in, or from capital cities, and these quests can get you some great iconic gear. Crescent Staff from Wailing Caverns, Staff of Westfall from the Dead Mine, Sword of Omen from Scarlet Monastery. Hell, with all the gear from quests and drops, Scarlet Monastery is almost like the first raid tier. Plus, dungeons are just super fun. It requires you to play a role, use every piece of your kit, and coordinate with 4 other people. Not to mention you have to first find those 4 other people in general chat, looking for group chat, and then you have to walk, get everyone there. You could summon them, but you need a warlock and 2 other people. God, I love dungeons. As you might imagine, pretty much everybody does a healthy mix of all 4 of these things. Some people are more interested in endgame raiding or PvP and not so much leveling, so they choose the fastest route to get through leveling, which is almost always strategic grinding and questing routes. That's by no means a wrong way to play. I think if you're playing the game and enjoying it, it doesn't matter how you play it. But if you think you want to be a raider, but you haven't played Classic WoW since back in the day, or maybe even at all, don't worry about rushing to max level. You'll get there, and when you do, raiding guilds will still be happy to have you. People are still going to be running Molten Core and Blackwing Lair, the first and second raids, and well into the late patches. But I really want to make it clear how good the leveling experience is in this game. There's a core game design philosophy in Classic that just seems to be lost in modern MMOs, and that is, leveling is not a gate to real content, leveling is real content. Most modern MMOs give into the idea that quote-unquote real content starts at max level, and leveling is simply a mechanic that eventually rewards you with said real content. I fear that many modern MMO players will try Classic WoW while still holding this mentality that leveling is just some chore. In Classic WoW, this couldn't be farther from the case. The leveling is a very, very lengthy process, so having that mentality can burn you out really fast. The main reason this mentality exists in the first place, I think, is because people generally will always gravitate towards the content in a game that is relevant. Relevance can be achieved through a variety of factors, and it certainly changes based on the genre of the game you're talking about, but in the case of MMOs, the relevance of the content is heavily influenced by three things: population, or how many people participate and can participate together; recursion, the amount of content or replayability; and incentive, how rewarding it is. Rewarding as in progression, for example, loot or XP, and rewarding as in fun. Rating and PvP are seen as the main pieces of content in most games because 1. Participation is not gated and is not spread out. 2. This kind of content is heavily recursive. And 3. It is often difficult, which adds to the fun, and rewards you with progression at various but hopefully good intervals, providing some incentive rather than just purely entertainment. Raiding is considered relevant content because the population, first of all, is all at 60 and no one is spread from each other. The recursion comes from the fact that these raids are genuinely challenging and can be done over and over again. The incentive to do them repeatedly is first gear progression. You get amazing gear, but you only get so much every time you do it, and every time you do it, you get different gear. There's also fun from the difficulty of the experience and the achievement and exclusivity that comes with doing the content that not everybody else gets to do. Endgame PvP is considered relevant content because the population again has everybody at level 60 and not spread out by level. The recursion is where PvP definitely shines, because even though the maps of the battlegrounds are always the same, the fact that all content is driven by conflict between two parties who both react unpredictably, each encounter will be different every time. And the incentive is less so about progression, though yes, you can still get gear, but more emphasis on simply winning each round, getting better at the game, and again, the achievement of it. Here the achievement would be being well known on your server as a good player. Now with that in mind, if we look at leveling, obviously its main incentive is going to be the good feeling of progression, but what leveling systems usually have a problem with is population and recursion. Of course, we'll generally see statistics of more characters still in the leveling process than characters at level 60, but the key point to population is that these characters, these players, should be able to participate together, and that can oftentimes not be the case in the leveling process. I simply can't do higher level content because I'm not strong enough, and my friends who are 10 levels higher than me have little to no incentive to do the content that I'm doing. Either they've already done it, or it doesn't give them XP, or it doesn't give them any relevant loot. Some games, for example Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy XIV, combat these problems with down-leveling systems, and other games, for example Warframe, basically center the entire game around progression. Classic WoW combats these problems by looking at the leveling content in the same point of view as a typical single-player RPG, where the point of the game, so to speak, is the leveling itself. Take the Elder Scrolls series, for example. You don't plow through levels to get to endgame in those games. There really isn't any raiding, and there certainly isn't PvP. It's about the adventure, not the destination, the getting there. The nice thing about making a single-player RPG in this regard is that it simply does not have to worry about this factor of population. But on the other hand, the relevance of the content in the game is much more heavily reliant on recursion and incentive. Instead of going for replayable content or randomized content, see roguelikes, these RPGs are often developed to have tons of content so that it feels endless without literally being endless. And the incentive of those games is definitely progression-based, so progression of the character's strength has to feel good and worthwhile, and it also helps massively if the story doesn't suck. No, WoW is not a single-player RPG, nor does it have or need the exact same depth as one. What it does do is it blends some of the depth of the progression and the vast open-world feeling of a single-player RPG with the depth that's gained from social interaction, i.e. an MMO platform. Classic WoW leveling fights the population problem, 1. By making the process take time and keeping players closer together that way, 2. By having lots of different content in different places, catered towards the same or similar leveling range, and 3, by incentivizing group play, group quests, and making the problem of out-leveling someone not so severe. Side note to that, if you're, say, 5 or so levels above or below your friend, you're within a perfectly fine range to group up with them and do quests and dungeons and such without hindering XP too much. You have not out-leveled your friend, and there's no reason for anybody to be discouraged, don't worry. I'd say the recursion definitely comes from the single-player RPG design of having a vast open world with tons of things to see and do. It feels like there is a ton to do, because there is, and this content feels more important because it requires more of you and the rewards often feel great. This leading into the incentive. Obviously, we're doing it to level up and get stronger. The incentive to keep going is that the leveling up and getting stronger feels good, because rewards are appropriate. Your character gains identity over time due to your gear you pick up at certain intervals and more regularly by the spells you acquire and the talents you choose. Rewards don't feel too small or make you feel like you wasted your time, but they also don't overpower you after every level up or every quest turn in, because doing that too much and oversaturating your rewards can more easily separate the population, i.e. out-leveling, and that would help create the problem of population not being able to adequately and properly interact. Now, I could talk about this stuff for hours, but I'm going to end it here. This is supposed to be about classic WoW leveling, not some in-depth analysis on RPG leveling systems. At the end of the day, you don't have to love leveling to love WoW, but I hope this gave you some insight as to what to expect from Classic. For the crowd that comes from retail to play Classic WoW for the first time, I fully expect a lot of them to be turned off by the leveling simply because it's so slow, and they might feel like they're doing quote-unquote irrelevant content. Now, we're not done on our warrior, by the way. Next time, we're going to talk about customizing our character even further with professions. So as always, stick around.